Greetings, everyone. Once again, it's Motamonidi sharing the authentic truth brought to us by Zulula 100. And here, the teaching I will share in English is going to be regarding, was Christ rich or poor financially according to the current Bibles? Because some fake pastors out there will claim that no, they will preach the gospel of prosperity and say that no, you have to be poor because the Christ was poor. We shall see if those type of teachings are biblical. Others will claim that no, it's okay to be rich, it's good to be rich because Solomon was rich, because David was rich. Now, when we go in Matthew chapter 2, verse 11, this is regarding the pilgrimage of the Magi, or the Magi. In Matthew 2, verse 11, you're told, they entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him, period. So here you're told that they worshipped the so-called the Christ. But that is a false translation. That is wrong. Because when they say Magi, those are basically people that were worshippers of idols. And they basically practice witchcraft. But the truth is revealed in Bibèl, the only authentic Bible without any errors or contradiction. But here, nevertheless, in the current Bibles, when they say that the so-called wise men in other versions worshipped him, is a false translation. But nevertheless, they brought forth some gift for the child. And you're told here, then they opened their treasure chest and gave him gift of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So you're told that they gave him gift, gold. And in Amplified Bible, you're told they presented to him gifts, in bracket, fit for a king. Fit for a king. So that means the quantity and the value was fit for a king. And so it was very expensive what they brought forward, right? So it was wealth. If supposedly that the Christ was financially poor, the fact that the wise men came and brought him gold and gift fit for a king, that means immediately he became rich. He surpassed the so-called billionaires or millionaires in our era. So already the notion that Christ was poor is completely false. And you have to understand that even before they received the gift, the family, meaning Mary and even Joseph, they were already rich. They didn't come from a poor family. They were already rich. And you have to understand when it says fit for a king, that's because it was the custom in ancestral Africa. When a king was coming, gifts were to be brought to him and wealth as a sign of respect to honor him. And basically they came, you have to understand that the so-called wise men, they came to honor the king who came in the visible system. So to have also support, financial support physically, so that's why they brought him gift of gold to his parent from a young age. And to see that custom, we go in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 1 to 2. That's regarding how it happened in ancestral Africa. It says, when the queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. Verse 2, arriving at Jerusalem with a very great caravan with camels carrying spices, large quantity of gold and precious stones, she came to Solomon and talked with him about all that she had on her mind. So that was the custom. And like I've mentioned, when Christ went there, even Mary, because the gift was for him, but it was to the family. So that where did that gold go? he stayed in the family. So that means the Christ was rich. He came from a rich family. Now, to go further, to further develop that, we go in John chapter 4, verse 7. In New Living Translation, you're told, soon a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Christ said to her, please give me a drink. Verse 8. He was alone at the time because his disciples had gone into the village to buy some food, period. So the question is, what did they buy food with? His disciples went to buy food. They brought food with money, with silver. All right? So if they were poor, how did they then have enough to buy food? That's only the beginning. In Luke chapter 9, verse 13, New International Version, he replied, you give them something to eat. They answered, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd. So here in Luke chapter 9, verse 13, is regarding Christ feed the 5,000. And they answered to him, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd. They didn't answer, we don't have the means to buy the food. No, they say, unless we go and buy the food for the crowd. So they had the means, they had the ability, they had the resources, the wealth to buy the food for all the crowd. They didn't say that they couldn't. And to give more context, it's regarding, like I've mentioned, Christ feed the 5,000. And for that, when we go in verse 10, Luke chapter 9, verse 10, when the apostles returned, they reported to Christ what they had done. Then he took them with him, and they withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. Verse 11, but the crowds learned about it and followed him. He welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Verse 12, late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because they were in a remote place. They were in a remote place. You see, that's why if they went to buy the food, it was going to take a lot of time for them to go out and buy the food and bring it back and so on. So that's why he had to do the miracle of multiplication. You see, it's not because they didn't have the means to buy the food. Verse 13, he replied, you give them something to eat. They answered, we only have 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd. Verse 14, about 5,000 men were there. 5,000 men were there. So if you want to buy food for 5,000 people, you're going to spend a lot of money, right? A lot of money. And here it says about 5,000. But if it is the spirit of the truth that inspires the scriptures, what is it about? Why it is not a precise number? So if you want to buy food for 5,000 people, it's going to cost a lot of money, more than $5,000 in the current money that we use. You see? So they had the means. So those who will say that the rich won't enter in the kingdom of heaven, no. The scriptures, the text doesn't say, even in the current Bible, that they won't enter. It says that it is going to be difficult. Difficult and impossible are two different things. Now, in John chapter 12, verse 5, in New International Version, you're told, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? Question mark. It was worth a year's wages. So, here, Judah, his true name is Soma, asked in the current ask of the Bible, why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? Question mark. And there's a distinction then between he doesn't consider himself or them as poor. He says the money given to the poor and not given to us because they themselves, they were rich. Contemporary English version. Why wasn't this perfume sold for 300 silver coins and the money given to the poor? And in verse 6, you're told, he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. So this, once again, is according to the current Bibles. And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. So here you're told that Judah was in charge of the money bag. If you have a money bag, that means you're well. You have money. That means you're rich. Amplified Bible. Since he had the money box, in bracket, serving as a treasurer for the 12 disciples. So Judah was the treasurer of the group. If the group was poor, they wouldn't need a treasurer. They wouldn't need somebody in charge of the money bag. Why would you need a money bag if you're poor? Why would you need a treasurer if you're poor? If you, let's say you have $500, $1,000, you don't need a treasurer. You don't need a money manager. No. For you are going to be able to count yourself. But to have a person dedicated for that responsibility, that means they had a lot of money, a lot of wealth, a substantial amount where they needed somebody in charge of it. You see? They needed a treasurer. So the group had a lot of money. Now, so for some people, we're going to think that, no, they only ate fruit on the way when they were walking. No, you're completely mistaken. They were well off. John chapter 13, verse 29. Since Judah had charge of the money, had charge of the money. Some thought that Christ was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival, or to give something to the poor, and not to them, because they were not poor themselves. In the New Living Translation, once again, it says in John chapter 13, verse 29, since Judah was their treasurer. So, for those who claim that Christ was poor, the scriptures, the text, the word contradict you. Some will claim regarding, there's the history regarding that woman that they name Mother Teresa. Some will claim that no, she went to paradise and so on. No, she didn't go to paradise. She's sleeping. Now, and you have to understand that according to history, she was asking for a lot of donation from a lot of people. You see, she requested a lot of money, donation, and so on to redistribute to the poor, according to history, according to what he said. But why didn't the Vatican give her money? Because the Vatican themselves, they are very rich. The Vatican, the state, is very rich. They have their own bank, own rule, own currency, own coins. They're separate from the Italian bank. They have their own rules, set of rules. So they even have their own army, their own police. And even regarding the the robe, the clothes that the Pope wears, cost a lot of money. 100,000 euros just for the robe that the clothes that the Pope wears. And when you see all the church, a lot of churches around the world, and where does that money go? You see? So, and you have to understand that they copied that, the Vatican, they copied that from the initiates. So, when they will say, no, the gospel of prosperity, it's a trick. It's basically to get your money. The Christ was rich. And silver and gold belong to the Creator. In Haggai chapter 2 verse 8, you're told, the silver is mine and the gold is mine. So, we are not teaching here to only focus on the money, on the financial, but the gospel must be taught faithfully and not misrepresent to satisfy bad, evil intentions. You see? The gospel must be faithfully told. The Christ was rich. So, that was the message. That was the teaching. All glory be to Loba, the only and unique Creator.